I'm Jake Monaco, the composer for Be Cool Scooby-Doo, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah!
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
My mistress is not some piece of property to be traded off!
Daphne, what are you doing?
I must speak, mistress! Valmonia wants to live her own life, follow her own dreams, and set her servants free as soon as possible.
Are your servants' words true, Valmonia?
Well, I have always dreamed of being a great mathematician or playwright.
A woman? In Greek theater? Absurd! Who will play the women?
Welcome, Scooby-Doo and animation fans, to episode 46 of the podcast. If you are newer to the show, it is great to see you here, and I hope the next hour and a bit is totally your jam. And if you are a regular listener to the podcast, welcome back, and thanks as always for your continued support. As is usually the case, I am happy to say that on today's episode, I am joined in conversation by another great guest, Cheryl Johnson, who worked as a background designer on the first season and art director on the second season of Be Cool Scooby-Doo, which debuted back in 2015 on Cartoon Network. It was really nice having Cheryl on for a couple of reasons. The first and most obvious being that she is a talented artist and designer, and I'd yet to speak with anyone on the art side of the production for that show, so it was really fun getting into some of the nuts and bolts of those departments, and a new perspective to the goings-on behind the scenes of Be Cool. The other reason is that it's been a while since I featured a guest who worked on Be Cool, and in a funny way, even though I would say in a heartbeat that Scooby-Doo or Are You is my favorite iteration of the show, I do feel strangely connected to Be Cool in a way I don't feel with a lot of the other shows and films. It was the Scooby that was new and on the air when I started the podcast, and whenever I return to talk about it, it feels a little bit like familiar ground, like a comfortable pair of shoes. Anyway, I think if you have any interest or love in Be Cool Scooby-Doo, or in art and design and how it applies to the process and craft of putting together an animated show, you're going to really enjoy this conversation. So with that, I will bring my little preamble to a close and let you get on to the chat with today's guest, background designer and art director Cheryl Johnson, and we will see you on the other side. My guest today has worked in animation for a number of studios over the course of her career, contributing to shows like Regular Show, Unikitty, Puppy Dog Pals, and more recently, Baby Shark's Big Show on Nickelodeon. What ultimately brings her to the attention of my humble podcast is her work on the 2015 Warner Brothers produced Be Cool Scooby-Doo, where she worked as a background artist before taking on the position of art director with the departure of Richard Lee in season 2. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Cheryl Johnson. It's great to have you on, Cheryl. How are things with you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Mike. I'm happy to be here and talk about Scooby.
You're actually the first person from the show on the art side. I haven't spoken to anybody on the art side yet, so I was kind of excited to have you on, and I apologize if I'm throwing like all the art questions at you.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm happy to chat about it. There's so many fun things on the art side to talk about, so I'm excited.
So, to my understanding, Be Cool was the first animation job that you got right out of school, correct?
Yep, that's right. It was my first gig in the animation industry, and I started in, I think I started in 2014 is when I was hired on as a background designer. And as you said, I was doing that for a bit, and then I transitioned over to art director.
It's not a bad start for a first show to be on.
No,
internationally well-known IP, yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun working on Scooby-Doo because whoever you talk to, you say, oh, what are you working on? And you say, oh, Scooby-Doo. Everybody knows Scooby-Doo. Everybody. Nobody's going to ask you, oh, what's that? So, instantly everybody's impressed. There's lots to talk about. And yeah, it's just wonderful to be part of such animation history. working on one of the Scoobies.
I find that a lot with a lot of people that I talk to, they could be like, yeah, I saved 15 kids from a fire and I have a Nobel Prize and I worked on Scooby-Doo. And that's where people go, oh,
Totally. You totally nailed it. That is a lot of the times when it's like, not that long ago, I chatted with somebody who told me, oh, I learned English watching Scooby-Doo. And I was like, mind blown. That's how big of a show it is. It's teaching people in other countries English.
That's actually kind of fascinating. Although I have recently heard that if you are listening, if you just sort of have a show, whether it's English or French or Farsi or whatever it is, just kind of passively having it in the background so that you get kind of like the rhythms and I suppose listening to something that's more youth oriented would probably be less of a challenge, I suppose, as far as vocabulary and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, we're not here to talk about learning English. What was the process for coming onto the show? Were you just like applying kind of everywhere, or what was
so getting into animation can be a little bit obtuse. So a lot of the times it's all about who you know, and they say that about the entertainment world in general. So the way I got in is I was going to school at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. And I was just about wrapping my time there. And I found out that one of my neighbors was an art director at Cartoon Network. She art directed on regular show. Her name is Paula Spence. And since then, I've always considered her a bit of a mentor. So I became friends with my neighbor. I showed her my portfolio and what I was up to at Art Center. I let her know that I was about to graduate. And she's like, I really like your work. Let's take you into Cartoon Network and see who we can introduce you to. So I did a tour of Cartoon Network with her. She introduced me to another art director, Sue Mont, who was friends with Richard Lee. And she knew that Richard was looking for artists for Be Cool Scooby-Doo. And she sent my work his way and he was impressed. And I chatted with him. And I think I chatted with the line producer at the time, Wade. And before I knew it, they were like, your work looks like what we're looking for on Be Cool Scooby-Doo. And I was in.
I know that Richard was there. I think he was there for like a year, just drawing and like designing and redesigning before they started staffing up with like Zach and John on the writing side. And I'm curious, at what stage did you come onto the show? Like, was it already ramping up production or was it still very much in the deep pre-production?
So it was ramping up production. Richard had done a decent amount of previs work and they kind of had a pretty good idea of what they wanted. I think at the time they had hired Todd Oman, one of their character designers. So they brought me on along with a bunch of other artists, another background designer, some prop designers. And once we were on, it was, full steam ahead. We started actually doing art for episodes that had been storyboarded. They had mini scripts at that point. So we were definitely starting production when I came on board.
And when everybody else kind of came in, there was still some sort of fine tuning that was done to some of the designs. I believe it was kind of still toning down some of the cartooniness of them. I wondered, was that mostly in the designing of the character models and whatnot, or did that also spill into like the backgrounds and the overall art direction of the show?
That was mostly with the characters and a little bit with the props. When they brought Zach Moncrief on board, he had a pretty specific vision that was slightly different from what Richard had been doing. So he worked with the character designer, Todd, and Richard, and they took away a little bit of that cartooniness and made it look a little bit more what I would call like a primetime look. Things were a little bit cleaner, a little bit streamlined, probably going to be a little bit easier on the animators. And they did the same thing with the props. They reduced the cartooniness a little bit. The backgrounds shifted on their own kind of naturally over the first like 10 episodes or so. There was still that original cartooniness that Richard had, but it got toned down slightly, but it wasn't right away. That's relatively normal. The style shifts over the first, season or so for any show.
Everybody's finding their groove and working out the kinks, and yeah,
you can definitely see it. Like if you look at like an old SpongeBob episode versus one like 3 seasons since. It's like night and day.
Well, in the SpongeBob case, you've also got episodes that were traditionally painted backgrounds, and then they switched to the digital painted backgrounds.
Sure.
So that's noticeable, but I don't know if that's inside baseball or something at this point. Coming on to the show, this was I think it was a very different take. I think the way a lot of people reacted, people did understand and take it as a very different take. It was much more comedic. Warner Brothers wanted them to lean into the comedy. I guess, well, I haven't asked kind of what your history with the franchise is as far as watching it as a kid and whatever, but did you have sort of preconceived notions about what Scooby-Doo was supposed to be? And was this kind of a pivot for you with the tone and everything? Or did you love the comedic approach and just kind of like jumped in, thrilled to be working on this?
Sure. Yeah, it was certainly the latter for me. As a kid, I wasn't really a Scooby-Doo fan, which is funny that it was the first show that I worked on. So I had cousins and friends that loved it. Like their favorite Scooby was Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, where the zombies were real. Spoiler, they're real in that one.
It's in the trailer. They
So
say this time the monsters are real, so you're not.
so like I've seen that a bunch of times, but in regards to like the Scooby series and stuff, like sometimes I would watch a pup named Scooby-Doo when I was, real little, and that would pop on TV, but generally I didn't watch a lot of it. So getting on board this one, knowing that it was a departure from traditional Scooby-Doo, didn't bug me at all. I was happy to try something new. The comedy of the series I actually really like. I find it quite funny. And I know that the visuals bumped a few people out there for sure. But what I found is when people actually watch it, they're like, oh, this is pretty funny. Like maybe Scooby kind of looks like Family Guy, which we don't love, but the jokes are really funny. So
I think the only real connection to Family Guy that I can pick up is like with the eyelids, the way the eyelids work. Family Guy has much stockier figures, whereas we've got more gangly character models with the show, with Be Cool. Just everything from the color palette to the background designs. I think the overall art direction of the show, very different from Family Guy, but people just locked into that. And I think the more it gets repeated, the more people just lazily is like, oh, it looks like Family Guy.
I know. They couldn't let it go.
That was such a hindrance to the show. They released those that image of the 5 characters like a year before the show even hit the air. So like people had already made up their minds about what they thought, having never seen a frame.
Right. And I feel like that really was unfair because, like I said, it was a really well done comedy. And I think we had really explored different aspects to each of the characters, especially the character Daphne. I really love how John and Zach and the team handled her. They really fleshed her out. She was this goofy wild card character. She got up to all kinds of ridiculous antics across the show, and I think just explored a side of that character that we hadn't seen before. And I think the visual language that we had developed, even the way the characters looked, like helped serve that comedy. Even down to the background. So when we were doing backgrounds, we were told, look at it like a sitcom or like proscenium staging. You want to keep elements around the outside to frame the action in the center. You want to get things out of the way of the characters so you can really see their acting and the comedic timing. We want that to shine like you're watching, a theater production or a sitcom. So keep that in mind when you're doing the background designs, which is something we did throughout the show. So yeah. Everyone needs to give Be Cool another chance.
I think part of the reappraisal, like I was just in a previous interview, I'd heard you mention that you liked Game of Chicken, the episode Game of Chicken. And so I was kind of trying to watch some episodes that I knew that you had some affinity for. And as I'm watching Game of Chicken, there's a scene where Fred tries to pole vault over a chasm and he hits I'm not sure if it's a stalagmite or a stalactite. I can't remember which ones hang from the ceiling. But Frank Welker there's a comedy beat with the park ranger, and then after the gag, Fred says something sort of under his breath, self-acknowledging something, and it hit me. I don't think I've ever heard Frank do Freddie's voice, like talking to himself under his breath. It's always been just very straightforward, very kind of broad, flat, and picking up that nuance and seeing little character beats where I know like animation it's so planned, and the cost involved and the time involved and the schedules that you're working with to give characters moments, silent moments to absorb an event or to acknowledge something that's purely character based. And again, this was a show that was so heavily leaning into the comedy, and the tendency I would think would be to just kind of just joke, just all gags, visual and verbal. And seeing moments in episodes where you do have those like little beats that have that character nuance in it. I think those are the things that when people go back and watch these shows, they're seeing these and they're realizing like, oh, okay, no, that we got so hung up on things that were just stupid to get hung up on. And the people who enjoy that humor and who enjoy character stuff and these characters, it's all just kind of like folding in.
Yeah. And there's a lot of moments like that in the show where a character will quietly reflect on or comment on something that has just happened in an unexpected comedic way that you just haven't seen in a Scooby prior to Be Cool. Yeah, it's really funny. And it just gets funnier over time too. And it looks better over time too, the whole show, which is par for the course.
I feel that with a franchise like this, there are times where I just hate referring to it as a franchise or an IP, but it's been around for over 50 years. It's more than just kind of a show. It's an entity. But with a franchise like this that has been around for so long, I feel that it's kind of invincible. It's proven to be invincible, and you can sort of be bold and you can take chances, and you've got the voice cast there to sort of anchor it. Like they sound like Freddie and Daphne and Scooby and whatever. And you can kind of be a little bit crazy with it, and it still feels like Scooby-Doo. Like there's an audio, we respond to audio in a way, and I think there's something about the audio component that locks us in or comforts us and makes it able for us to process bolder visuals, I guess, for lack of a better.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because, what is a Scooby show if you don't have that iconic Scooby-Doo voice? You can't have him all of a sudden sound like Alec Baldwin and have everybody be on board. So yeah, you're totally right. You have to keep that as an anchor. And the visuals are where you can really play with stuff. So I think us pushing the visuals the way we did on Be Cool Scooby-Doo was absolutely a risk we're taking. And I hope that Warner's will do something similar in the future. Maybe it's going to take them a while for everyone to forget about Be Cool. But I hope they continue to do that, because there's just so much you can do with Scooby as an IP if you keep those core components. Like there's always going to be a mystery. We're always going to have our main cast of characters. They're going to sound a certain way, and they have certain traits built into them that we're always going to see. But the rest of it, why don't you explore and try something different? I feel like Mystery Inc. did that pretty well too. Like they took a pretty dark turn with Scooby with some very stunning, iconic visuals. And that one was really well received.
I'm curious, again, you being in the art department side of things, because the response to the visual aspect of the show was so reactionary and it was so aggressively negative. Were you all well into production or past the point where that really affected you, or was there a response in the department where you're kind of like, man, people, they kind of hate us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. So I can't remember exactly when the show was released. So we were probably at least a year into things. So at that point, if you release it and, the people, they don't like it, there's not a lot you can do to change it. We're not going to pull a Sonic the Hedgehog and redo everything. There's just no way we can. we don't have the ability to do that. So I think for some of the artists, it may not have taken them as a surprise because it looks so different from other Scoobies. For me, it wasn't a really big deal. I don't read into that stuff a ton because I really feel like, the people who are invested in Scooby and they watch it and they can get past that first shock of seeing how different everything looks will really enjoy the show. And I think that was actually the case. Like I've seen YouTube reviewers who are like, okay, you really got to watch this show because it's very funny. It's a really great take on Scooby. So the negative stuff is just kind of it was there in the background, but it didn't affect us a ton. And it certainly didn't change the way we approached the art on the show.
Okay, that was kind of, I thought, especially with you transitioning to art director, I mean, as a background designer or painter, you're functioning in a capacity where you've got your one job.
Sure.
and you're doing what the production needs you to do in that one job. But as an art director, you're managing a broader spectrum of things, and it's all what's the word I'm looking for? You're kind of in control of that art side of it, and you're seeing the reactions to it, and so it's much more directly affecting you than it is the person who's being told to do something a certain way.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of a nice transition into what it was like to take over as art director on the show. So Richard and all of us on the design team had laid this foundation. So when I took over, and I'll also note that I took over with a co-art director, Robbie Irwin, really great guy. He currently is art directing on Rick and Morty. So when he and I took over after Richard, and there was also a brief interim art director, Ernie Gilbert, also a really nice guy. But he got on the show, and then he warned them like, hey, there's another project that might pop up that I'm really interested in. I might take it. It did pop up. So he left. He's only there for a couple months. And then Robbie and I took over. So we were so used to working in the style that we'd established with Richard, and the design team was really happy with it. The directors were really happy with it. Zach and John and everyone was happy with it. So we had no intent to change it at all. It was, how do we keep this train moving forward? How do we make it better? How do we continue to serve the vision of Richard, Zach, all the people above us? And so we picked up that mantle and we just kept rolling with it. Wherever we could add extra things, we definitely did. Like, I think we spiced up the color palettes a little bit more. Things got a little bit more rendered. We had a little bit more depth and variety and color in there. Slightly more structure to some of the backgrounds. The character designs when we took over, I think they got a slight refining pass. It probably wouldn't be immediately apparent to any of the viewers, but they did get cleaned up a little bit. And the props and the effects, they largely stayed the same.
So what would have been involved in the cleanup for the character models?
I think
what would be refined essentially?
Yeah, so I think they went in there and one of our character designers refined some really small details. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he probably went to Zach, who was the person who really weighed in the most on the way the characters look, and asked, is there anything you want to tweak? And it would be simple things like, well, Daphne's lip in like the three-quarter front view is looking a little off. Let's smooth it out. Maybe let's get rid of this extra line here on Shaggy's sleeve, like that kind of stuff. Really small technical details that just kind of smoothed them out a little bit.
It's interesting though, because the art side of things sort of took such a hit. It's nice to hear. I mean, when I say it's nice to hear, I don't mean like I am looking for the validation. I love the show. I love the way it looks. I love the work that all of you did on it. But like for the people who are conflicted about it or who think, they just threw something together and just, threw it out there. And it's like, no, this stuff was worked hard on.
Yeah, it always is.
There was craft to it.
Is. Yeah.
And you mentioned, and it's been mentioned previous in conversations I've had, that the cartoony look of the characters was in service to the humor of the show. Like if you had the traditional classic models, or even the backgrounds or the props or anything, like a lot of the comedy just wouldn't fly. It would just seem so incongruous.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't have worked nearly as well. You can't have, Scooby doing these like kind of goofy one-liners and have him look more like the traditional Scooby. It needed that little element of goofiness to it to justify the comedy.
The vending machine joke would never work with traditional character models.
No. I mean, you could certainly try, but I think it's a lot funnier when Scooby and Shaggy look more cartoony than they usually do.
I also find it kind of ironic that, people, I feel like all I'm doing is bringing up like the negative comments that people made about the show. People complained about the look of Scooby and thought it was not a very aesthetically pleasing design. And Iwo Takamoto's original design for Scooby was, let's take this majestic Great Dane, show animal, and whatever made that dog successful as a show animal, let's tweak that. So we're going to bow the legs. We're going to, like, he specifically made Scooby an unattractive Great Dane. So I always found that criticism sort of humorous because it was literally feeding into what the original design brief on the character was.
That's funny. I actually wasn't aware of that, but it makes total sense because I mean, Scooby, he's a big goofball and he's a big chicken, so he can't be this like fancy show dog. He's got to be a little bit silly.
I'm curious about working with Richard Lee. You mentioned before, like, you didn't have a great connection to Scooby. I know a lot of people who worked on the show came from sort of a non-Scooby background. And I think that's one of the things that helps service the show as well, because sometimes if you're coming in and you're slavishly loyal to an idea or an aesthetic, you're not pushing things in a creative way that evolves the concept. And I know Richard was brought in from kind of outside as well. And curious what it was like sort of working with Richard as art director and how this being your first job. And
I think I get what you're asking. So working with Richard was really great, especially as somebody that was new to the industry, and he was my first art director. He's all around a really lovely person and just a joy to have on any show. And he's a real talent too. So his personal art style and what he was seeking for Scooby is highly influenced by like 60s and 70s comics, like the work of R. Crumb, like maybe some of the animation you've seen in Pink Floyd's The Wall, like kind of this like funky, psychedelic, really pushed cartoony look. And so he applied a little bit of that to Be Cool Scooby-Doo. And for me, that was like really fun. That was a type of design that I was interested in, but I hadn't done a lot as a new designer. So just being able to flex those muscles and learn from him and see him do drawers and see how he approached stuff was really, really fun.
I heard that some of the early design direction that he got was they wanted to go for more of an R. Crumb, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers sort of underground comics with an X kind of vibe,
right.
Which fascinates me. I would love to see that stuff, but still happy with what we got.
Yeah, I think I have somewhere an early drawing Richard did of the Mystery Machine in that style. I hope I still have it. It's really cute. This is really chunky, like pencil drawing that's pushed in this really fun way, and definitely feels like something, R. Crumb may have come up with. And there was, when I first got on the show, I'll never forget being in Richard's office, there was a bunch of posters up on the wall of Scooby and the gang in that really push style. They had really bendy arms and legs. At some point, you may know this, they wanted Daphne to have roller skates on for the whole series. So she had roller skates on, and they were against this like tie-dye psychedelic background. Was pretty interesting. I understand why they got away from it, because it was probably a little distracting and wouldn't have served the comedy as well. And the animation, I think, could potentially kind of go all over the place. It would be difficult for a team of animators to like have this kind of funky rubber hose look when you really want to be paying attention to the jokes. So I get why they departed from that.
Might be fun for a short, but maybe not a 22-minute episode.
Yeah, exactly. for like, how many of those did we do? 22 minutes with characters that look like that would be a lot. But yeah, Richard was a great first art director because I think he did a good job of giving me space to explore, make my own mistakes, but then also giving me the guidance that I needed, being so new. So it was a really good supportive environment for a new artist. And I think that my fellow designers, a lot of them felt the same way.
And what was the overall pipeline like? Also, were you were doing background design, were you also layout, or was there a separate layout person?
So by layout, do you mean, what do you mean by layout? Because it can mean a couple different things.
Well, my understanding of layout is placement of characters and essentially cinematography.
Yes. So that was it wasn't done by us in background. I think it was done by our animation studio.
I know on some smaller productions, background artists will sometimes double as layout artists. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
I
not
wasn't
in
sure
this
how
case.
robust the Be Cool art department was.
Yeah, no, we didn't do that. I'm pretty sure it was done by the animation studio, which is usually how it's done these days on TV productions at some of the bigger studios. Usually they let the animation studio do that.
Okay.
I know some smaller studios, like you were saying, they do that in-house. So the pipeline was, so a script would be, well, first it would start with an outline or premise written by John and the writing team. Then it would go to a script after it had probably been seen by the network executives, I imagine, because they're usually, especially early on, they're involved in a lot of the process. So once script is approved, it goes right to the directors and the board artists. The directors kind of brainstorm. They get together with the writers. What do we want this episode to look like? Board artists take over from there, and they can spend anywhere from like 4 weeks, which is really short, to like 6 weeks boarding an episode. And then at that point, while they're boarding it, like the directors are looking at it, Zach was looking at it, everybody's kind of looking at it, picking it apart, changing it. And then hopefully by around the 6-week mark or so, it might go to some revisionists for some additional changes so the board artists can move to the next episode. And once the storyboards are locked, they're done, then they'll come to us in design. And we will work directly from the storyboards, doing backgrounds, props, characters, special poses, which we didn't do a lot of special poses on Scooby, which is unusual. Usually you do a bunch of special poses of characters. And we would be at it for, I think for black and white for Scooby, we had about 2 weeks for an episode. And early on, there's always a lot of backgrounds. So we were doing, how many were we doing? We were probably doing a good like 60 or so backgrounds an episode, maybe a little bit more. And our animation studio was able to do hookup backgrounds, and sometimes they would do cleans for us based on our rough too. That all depends how that relationship works out on each show. It's a little different. Sometimes the studio here in the States has to do all of the backgrounds. Other times you'll do keys or rough keys, and they'll do some cleanup work. But once the black and white designs are done, then the color team takes over, and that's usually about another 2 weeks in color. And then after that, hopefully all the designs are wrapped up, then they ship it to the animation studio so they can start their process, which can take, how long do they work on it for? It's probably a couple of months that they're animating on an episode. And in Scooby's case, it was traditional animation. So people were going in there with pens and pencils and like actually doing frame by frame animation. It wasn't Flash, it wasn't Harmony, no sort of like a puppet rigging there. So
that's awesome.
It took them, yeah. And we had 2 animation studios too. Yeah, it was all traditional. We had one in the Philippines called Snipple, which they did a really nice job. And then we had one in Korea called Emation, I think was our second animation studio. Okay. Yeah.
I'm curious with the animation as a process, the writing was pushing things in a way that I wondered if it ever sort of butted against the art side in a negative way. Because in animation, like to do crazy angles and stuff, you mentioned the hookup backgrounds, which is basically the same background, but it's like
it's a new angle.
Yeah, exactly. In animation, you don't just like, well, I want this angle, so turn the camera that way for one shot or something. You literally have to like make something in order to accommodate an up or down shot or whatever. So I'm curious how the synergy between the writing and the art department was on the show.
I would say that it was pretty good in terms of like new angles and stuff being introduced. That's all going to be done in the storyboard phase. And the writers, I think they take a look at the storyboards and they might say like, this is way too many dynamic angles. It doesn't serve the comedy. This isn't what we're going for. Or they might say, oh, okay, this works. It's an action sequence. But make sure you keep the comedy bits like a little bit more straightforward. Keep, camera in the middle of everything. Don't do anything funky with perspective. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know if there was any like clash there between what the writers were hoping to achieve with the comedy, what the storyboards were doing. And then by the time it came to us in design, we didn't feel any of that if there was any type of discrepancy. Yeah.
That's good. That's how the process should work.
Yeah.
That's the whole person.
That's how it was going.
It's the whole
when
purpose of
you're in
having
design,
the head of a department. They're supposed to absorb those things so that you guys don't feel
right,
them.
right. And that very well could have happened because I'm in design as a background designer. I'm supposed to get my task, do my thing. If there's things happening outside of my role, it's probably better that I don't know about them. And that's what I do now as an art director too. I am there to direct my team and support them, but I'm also there to shield them from some of the things that are just going to be a distraction to the tasks that they need to get done.
But you weren't getting like notes where you're like, why do they want so many different versions of this background?
Not really. I feel like it was pretty, for someone who was so new to the industry and having this crew of people coming at it from different angles, it really wasn't that bad in that regard. Because I certainly know shows where they get up to like version 25 on a background painting, and you're like, God, how can you change it that many times? How do you have the time? How are your artists not quitting right and left? And we didn't have that on at least with background designs on Scooby. And then when I took over as art director, by that point we had a whole season under our belt. So we had sorted through a lot of this, there was season 1 growing pains. So we didn't get into like multiple versions of designs when I took over as art director. And I also personally wouldn't tolerate it because I don't want to overburden the artists and have them get really discouraged. Like, it's my job to work with the director, with the producer, and like troubleshoot what they want, make sure their vision is in there, and help the artists get there in as few versions as possible.
What was the overall, much like Mystery Incorporated before it, Be Cool had a very unique look, color palette, overall design. I'm curious, both initially coming into it and also how you carried it forward as art director. What was the overall design sense of the show, color sense of the show? Were there any touchstones where it was like, we're trying to keep within this kind of realm of reality or verisimilitude or comedy or whatever? And like, again, touching back on Mystery Incorporated, they were very much going for like an 80s slasher film kind of look, and a lot of the backgrounds reflected that, and the deep purples and reds and oranges and browns, and some of it was kind of unsettling, and also all the deep shadows and stuff. Curious how that was.
So you were
so the general design sense and approach to it, as far as the way it looks and feels, and things that you would be told to use or not use.
Right. So I think we wanted I'll talk about the backgrounds first, since it's really the part that I'm the most familiar with. We wanted everything to feel grounded in reality. So grounded in the rules of perspective, things should recede to a vanishing point in a realistic way. Our color choices should feel grounded in reality too. Like, we're not going to use some super vibrant magenta unless it really served the story or highlighted something really specific. Go for the colors that you would expect. Like, you do a tree, the leaves are going to be green, the trunk's going to be brown. Same with the color design of our props and stuff. Like, if there's a fire hydrant, you're going to go with red. We didn't want to push the colors of the backgrounds and the props of the designs too much that it would be a distraction to the main event, which is the characters and their acting in the comedy. So the color choices and the design choices, everything surrounding them was meant to push them to the forefront, and they're the stars of the show. So that's why we designed the backgrounds the way we did, and the way we did the colors the way we did. And that's also why the characters are more pushed. So you can pick them out right away. Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice
still a little bit of cartooniness in there.
There's a very, I don't want to say pastel-y, but it's kind of borderline pastel-y for me as far as the colors used and the way that shadows are used as well. They feel more like highlights or lowlights rather than a lack of light to obscure or hide. They're more tonal elements in the backgrounds and in the environments than they are shadows, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so we didn't do a lot of high contrast lighting in our backgrounds. Things are relatively flat. They've got a light and a shadow pass, but nothing really, really high contrast. And that's just to kind of flatten it out and go for that proscenium staging look. Put the focal point in the middle around the characters. Like, don't do anything around the periphery that's gonna distract from them. So taking out some of those like really dark shadows that you see in Mystery Inc. was a purposeful design choice that we made. We wanted to keep it a little bit flatter, a little less contrasty.
And how did you carry that over, just to roll through to the other part of that question, the initial question? Obviously, all that stuff was set up. You come in as art director. Did you just continue with it, or was there anything specifically that you chose to refine or move in any kind of direction that was maybe more suited to your particular style or taste?
So when Robbie and I took over, we pushed some of that stuff. We added in more contrast. We added in more saturated colors. We made things a little bit more dynamic. At that point, Jeff Mendenkow was more involved in the production. And one of his preferences was for things to be a little bit more pushed. He really likes high contrast. He likes things to feel dramatic. So we were able to take what we had set up and put a little bit more of that in there. So we would have darker shadows. We would have brighter highlights. We'd have more dynamic angles, use darker colors, a wider variety of colors. And we pushed the show in that direction, I think, with us as art directors for the second season, which is more fun too.
What would you say were some unique artistic or design challenges with the show?
I think what is the most fun and the most challenging about being on a Scooby show is they never go to the same place twice. The only place where the characters regularly are is in the Mystery Machine. But other than that, every episode is in a new location with a new monster, or new ghost, or new mystery. So you're constantly having to design things from scratch. Now you have the Scooby library you can look back on and see like how Scooby handled a spooky castle, a spooky hotel, and all that kind of stuff in the past. But how do you also like make it fresh again and give it a new sheen for whatever Scooby iteration you're working on? That's definitely the most challenging part, because you are having to balance what's come before, the current needs of the show. You're always doing lots of research on new types of locations, and you never really know where they're going to end up. Like we did an episode where Scooby and the gang were at a retirement home.
Yes.
So like that's a fun challenge. How do you make a retirement home look spooky? And it was haunted by,
I suppose it depends on how you feel about old people.
I think it was a gorilla running around this retirement complex.
What were the schedules like? I know most animation is kind of embattled when it comes to time. Just feeding off of what you were saying, like it's similar in live action when you have a TV show that doesn't have standing sets. If they're traveling around, something like the X-Files, where you've got a new location or multiple locations every episode.
Yeah.
That's all design and production design and every week. So I'm curious, because you had, like you said, lots of design challenges as far as locations every week. What was what was it stressful? Were you guys like
Yes,
burning the candle at both ends?
Yes, it is very stressful. That's the nature of TV animation. You got to do a lot in not that much time. And I feel like over time, the schedules have gotten smaller. So we had, for each phase of design, we had 2 weeks. So we'd have 2 weeks to do all the background. So every time they're in a new location, every episode, you don't have any stock that you can go back to. You have to do all this stuff from scratch. So you've got 2 weeks to do all these brand new backgrounds, and then you've got 2 weeks to do all the color. And as an art director, you're always juggling a few episodes at once. So you've got the black and white team on one, and then you move the color team to another episode, and then the black and white team is on another episode. So it is very stressful, and it is difficult to manage the workload. It's really important to me, especially as a supervisor, that people work their 8 hours. I don't want them doing a lot of overtime. I need them to go home to rest so they can come back fresh every day, do their best. So how do we manage it? You got to be in communication with your team all the time. So I'm regularly checking in with the artists, see how they're doing. Is there anything that I can take off their plate and do? Can I shift? Maybe somebody got an easier assignment and we can shift some backgrounds with somebody else or props to another person. Maybe we do freelance. That's a normal occurrence. So if an episode gets really heavy, you can contact an artist who's not on the show and freelance to them a chunk of work. And if things get really, really heavy, you go to your line producer and you say, I think we might need more artists, which is something that we definitely did on the second season. We expanded our background design team by one person, which helped quite a bit. So yeah, it's a lot of work. We're scrambling to make episodes of Scooby.
And how was your team? I don't know if that's going to be like playing favorites or picking your favorite children or whatever, but how is it working with your art department?
It was great. Let's see. We had various character designers over the first and second season, but when I was art director, we had two character designers, primarily Bryce Collins and AJ. I can't remember AJ's last name. And working with both of them was really great, especially Bryce. He was really new to the industry, but a really hard worker, hit those deadlines and really push things wherever he could. So working with those two was great. Background design, we had 3 designers, and I would do design as well. We had Eric Keynes, we had George Fort, and Jamie Lee, and all 3 of them were just like powerhouses. They could do so many backgrounds in a short amount of time. And these things are complicated. They're realistic, they're grounded in reality. So we've got lots of little details in there. We have realistic perspective. So they were all really great. Props. For a long time, we worked with Lance Falk.
Yeah.
Who you should reach out to Lance because he'll probably.
Oh, he was my first interview. No.
Oh, great.
I think my 3rd interview. Yeah, he was first year of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, Lance is really great. He's an industry veteran. He's been doing this a long time, so it was a real pleasure to work with him. And he was on first season, a lot of the second season. A real, just like such a talented and speedy designer. He could knock out so many props and effects for us so quickly. And then after he left, we had Kari Safas. He joined as a prop designer, brand new artist to the industry, really wonderful guy. He did some fantastic work on the show, and it was really great to train a new artist like that, work with him, have him bring some fresh ideas to the show. And then color, we had let's see. So for color design, which is the person that colors in characters and props, we worked with James. What's James' last name? James Peterson, maybe? I have to look it up. I can't remember. You might want to look it up and double check. But that was another guy who was like an industry veteran who could just do like hundreds of color designs over a couple of days. Just completely reliable, really wonderful person to work with. And then in the paint department, we had a handful of background painters as well. So we had Garrett Lee that was on there for the second season a little bit, really great painter. Melissa Rodriguez, another really fantastic painter, and then Jason Lee, all new artists that I had met actually at school, brought them on board. So there I was as a new art director and all these new painters, and we got through it. We learned together. Yeah, this is a really fantastic team. I love working with the artists. It's my favorite part about being an art director is, I'll give them a little bit of art direction and send it their way, and it always comes back like 10 times better than I expected it to. There's so much talent out there in the animation industry.
Kind of makes me think an interesting perspective is Be Cool's your first animation job in the industry. You get into the art department. I'm guessing to a certain degree, because it's your first job, Richard is maybe in something of like a mentor role, and then you transition into art director. You're like a year in, and now you're sort of in that position of being in something of a mentor role.
Yeah.
How was that like for you?
It was not easy, but it was a fun challenge. When I was in art center, I had plotted out my career, and I predicted that I would become an art director 10 years into the industry, which I haven't even been in the industry 10 years yet, but I'm
That's a very close. Velma thing for you to do.
Yeah. And a year and a half in, the line producer at WV were like, Cheryl, you seem like you could do this. You want to do it? And Ernie, the interim art director we had worked closely with me and Robbie, and he was like, you guys are great. You can do this. And so we were like, okay, sure, let's give it a shot. And I'm really glad that I did do it. I feel like it was tough, but I was ready for it. On any show that I'm on, I'm a curious person. I like to get to know the crew. I like to know how things are working and really get involved in the nuts and bolts. So I did that on Scooby, and I feel like I had a pretty good idea of how things were working. I knew the crew super well. I had a pretty good relationship with Zach and our storyboard directors. So it was a relatively smooth transition. I think it also helped that I had Robbie Irwin, my co-art director, there with me as well. He didn't have much art director experience either, but there was the two of us there to help each other get through it. And then when he left to go on Rick and Morty in like the middle of the second season, by that point, I felt like I had enough experience that I could take over on my own.
And how did you split up duties between the two of you?
So let's see.
Did you just split episodes, or?
That's a good question. I think
something a little more abstract.
Yeah, it's a little more abstract than that. I think we would just kind of like assess each morning what needed to get done. And then he would handle one thing, I would handle another thing. We were always on the same page with everything, which is key if you're a co-art director, because it's not easy to share a supervising role like that, especially if you disagree. So you have to be on the same page about everything. We were like the parents of the design team. So we got to be on the same page.
I kind of get the vibe that might be why that show worked the way it did, because I know there was conflict, but I feel that within departments, like everybody was gelling. So it was more like department to department sort of butting against each other. So things weren't falling apart. It was still, work was getting done. You know what I mean?
Right.
And actually that kind of leads me into, I'm curious, to varying degrees, I've heard, I used the word embattled earlier. I'd heard it was a difficult production pretty much from beginning to end. And particularly in season 2, there was transitioning roles and people kind of moving in and moving out. How insulated were you from that? Obviously in season 2, as an art director, you probably were dealing with more of that hands-on. Obviously you worked well and enjoyed working like with your teams and stuff, but the overall sort of production experience as far as dealing with producers and writers and everything, I guess, how was that vibe for you? And also specifically kind of addressing the upheaval, I guess, in season 2.
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately in the entertainment industry, that kind of thing can happen in the middle of productions where things shift around, maybe it's not a creative fit, people come and go, and that did happen on Be Cool Scooby-Doo. But I'm happy to report on the design and the art side, it didn't impact us a whole lot. So Zach left and then Jeff Midnicow took over. At that point, myself and Robbie have been working with Jeff quite a bit. So like we kind of knew what to expect. We knew what his vision was for the show, and he was really clear about communicating that with us. And then it's our job to disseminate that to the team, make sure that they know what they're doing. And because Robbie and I were on, we were really good collaborators, it was easy for us to like get the team to shift as they needed to. And for the most part,
Jeff was directing on the show pretty much since day one.
Right. Yeah, he had been on the show since the beginning.
He wasn't just some random element that like entered the.
No. Yeah, he was director season 1 and was influential on the show quite a bit throughout season 1. So, like I said, with that, and we worked with him with the show being where it was in season 2. It really wasn't a super bumpy transition for us in design, which I'm happy to report because sometimes those things don't go very well. And when they go poorly, what happens is a bunch of the crew leaves, which is a real scramble to have to hire new artists in the middle of production while keeping everything going. And we didn't have that kind of turnover. So I'm really grateful for that.
Do you have any favorite episodes of the show that you worked on, either or actually that you've worked on like on a production level, or that you just love kind of as a viewer, as far as just enjoying the episode? I could see those two being mutually exclusive in some cases, where maybe it was really great opportunities you had like doing something compared to just watching it, enjoying it.
Yeah. So one that I really enjoyed working on, I thought was a lot of fun, was in the second season when they are all, Scooby and the gang are on a spaceship. I don't remember the name of the episode. Yeah, that was a lot of fun because it's not every day you get to design like inside of a spaceship and the surface of a meteor and do these like really cool like paintings of outer space. The monster was pretty creepy, that like robot.
Well, that gave us
skeleton guy.
Space Kook was back.
Yeah. And we got to do this like ore factory inside of this space station, and all that stuff was really, really fun. I really enjoyed working on that episode. In terms of episodes I thought were fun to watch, the retirement home one, that was pretty cute. I like the first episode quite a bit too, where Scooby and Shaggy get stuck in the vending machine. It's been a while. I gotta revisit the show.
There's so much in that first episode that I enjoy.
Yeah. I think it really got the series off to a good start. Another one is when Fred becomes a magician.
Ah, yes. I don't remember the name of the episode, but that's the Magic Castle episode, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Flight
the
of
background
hand.
designs in that.
Of hand. Yes.
The background designs were a lot of fun, especially once you get into the Magic Castle and there's these floating lamps everywhere. I remember when our designer did that. I think I may have pitched that idea to the designers. Let's stick these floating lamps everywhere. And then Garrett Lee, one of our painters, did the colors for it. And it came out really spectacular. And seeing Fred as this like macho 80s inspired magician is just really, it's really great. His design was hilarious. I think that was done by Bryce Collins, our character designer.
What do you find yourself drawn to as an artist? Like when you're approaching a project or an element of production, what do you like? Some people, you mentioned the space thing, and you mentioned really digging the fact that there was like the ore mining facility and whatever. When you see something come along in a storyboard or a script, what excites you, or you're like, I cannot wait to get my fingers on that kind of thing?
So for me personally, things that I really like, I love drawing animals. So anything that has anything to do with an animal, like if we go to a zoo, I'm really going to enjoy doing something like that. I like designing spaces that are, traditionally fun, like a space station is fun because there's lots of little things you can do to explore. You can come up with new shapes. Like, how do you want these hallways to look? Do you want them to be triangular shaped? They could be hexagons. They could be, whatever you want them to be. And then you sprinkle in all this fun little detail, like exploring the details of a space is really fun. How does that serve the story? That's a really fun challenge to solve with every background. What can we stick in there that hints at something else in the episode? How can we make the space feel the way we need it to feel in the storyboards? Like, how do you make it feel scary? How do you make it feel funny? How do you make it feel comforting? So we have to keep those things in mind with every background that we design.
Are you more drawn to like drawing tech or drawing nature?
It really depends. I'm not super picky. I think I probably lean a little bit more towards organic nature stuff. Like right now I'm on Baby Shark, so it's all like seashells and corals and sponges, and I love it. It's really fun.
A lot of your work seems to be in the sort of preschool scope of things with Scooby and regular show. I'm not familiar with Unikitty. Was Unikitty preschool?
Unikitty was, I think initially they intended it to be preschool, but it's a little bit older than preschool, but it's definitely influenced by preschool design.
Just curious if that's, I know for a lot of people in the industry, it's follow the job. And a lot of times your previous job informs the next job that you get. So like if you're really good at comedy, all anyone's looking for is comedy. Or if you're doing preschool, you keep getting the preschool. So I'm curious, is that an area that you're drawn to, or is that just kind of where your career's taken you?
it is an area that I'm drawn to. I like doing designs for little kids because you get to be a little bit more playful, a little bit more fun. You can push the color palettes a little bit more. And that I really enjoy. So we had that in Unikitty, and we definitely have it in Baby Shark. It's just really fun to explore a world for little kids. And they respond to bright colors, so we can put lots of bright colors in preschool shows. And yeah, I just really like designing things for little kids.
Regular show is another one of my favorites, and I noticed you got the one regular show credit. Obviously, you have the connection with your neighbor. Was that just a freelance gig, or? It
was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a freelance gig, and they didn't tell me what episode it was going to be until I started, and I learned that it was a Labyrinth spoof, and I was like, oh, you just gave me one of the best episodes you could possibly give me. Wow, thank you.
It stands out. I mean, it probably has more in common with Scooby-Doo than anything else sort of on your resume, but it does, it's a little more of that like late night animation kind of
right
Adult Swim sort of vibe. So it's great, but it is this like flag that's just, hey, here's something different.
Well, I also did art director on Apple and Onion.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, and that's in line with the regular show stuff and the Scooby stuff. And I think that's why I got that gig on Apple and Onion, because I had work that was like what they were looking for. And it's like you said, when you have work in your portfolio that looks a certain way, you're going to get jobs in that direction. So now I have both. So if I want to go back to, a more realistic show like a Scooby, Apple and Onion regular show, I can. But now I've got also the Unikitty stuff and the Baby Shark stuff that's more cute, little kid friendly. So I can do both, which is awesome.
So you're 7 years into your 10-year plan?
Yeah.
So what's the next 3 years for you? And where do you want to be?
I'm going to keep riding my wave on Baby Shark. So we're on our second season now, and that's going to take us, along for a while. I hope we get another season because I'm really happy on this show. The crew's really great. The design is really fun. The design team's really fun. So I'm hoping I'll be there for the next 3 years, but you never know. Things change very quickly in the entertainment industry. People hop around. But I hope to work on properties that are similar to Baby Shark. Like if I could get on a Care Bears show, done. Sign me up. I'd almost work on that for free.
Say it with conviction so that it manifests. Weirder things
but
happen.
At the same time, like I would happily go back to a Scooby production. I had a lot of fun on Scooby, and I would like to go back as a designer because, like I said, every episode is in a new location, so you never get bored on that show. You're constantly doing new things. So I would easily go back to doing a background design gig on a Scooby series if Warner Brothers ever wants me back.
Do you have any ambition to create your own material at some point, or are you just working in the salt mines doing the design work you can and having fun where you can?
Yeah, people ask me that, and I feel like I don't have the writing story aptitude that you really need to do your own show. So probably not. I have ideas, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever hop into, being a showrunner or being a producer and get into those roles. But who knows? I didn't think I was going to be an art director a year in, so.
We need more lady showrunners.
We do. We do.
Apparently the numbers, they spiked somewhere in like the 90s or the aughts, but have since dropped off again. And it's like, why?
Who knows? You gotta go ask those network executives and all the people that hear all the pitches. Like, why are you saying no to all the ladies coming in with pitches?
So what would you say your takeaway of working on Be Cool is? What is, especially not being like a big Scooby person coming in, what did that mean to you? What was the legacy? What was the legacy of that?
So, like I said at the beginning, I'm super grateful that I was able to start my career on a franchise like Scooby-Doo because everybody knows Scooby-Doo. It's just a real honor to work on and to know that my creative efforts like helped develop one part of the Scooby franchise. I think it's going to be an experience that I'm always going to carry with me. And I think Be Cool Scooby-Doo, what it leaves behind is it leaves behind like a fresh, new, really creative and hilarious take on Scooby that I think it's definitely worth revisiting. I hope that Warner Brothers will take a look at it again in a few years and be like, we really did have something here. Maybe we should try this again, even if it's with Scooby or some other franchise they have. I think it's an extra bright spot in the history of Scooby shows. I think we did such wonderful things with all the characters, especially like Daphne. Like I said, I feel like she really turned into her own character in Be Cool Scooby-Doo, and it was a version of her we hadn't seen before. She was such a goofball, and yeah, I'm incredibly proud of the work that I did on Be Cool Scooby-Doo, and I hope 10 years down the road I can work with young artists that are like, oh, I watched that when I was 6. It was great.
So you've got Baby Shark season 2. Is that pretty much all your focus as far as new things? Is there anything else that you have that you want to plug or throw out there?
It's just Baby Shark. Lots of Baby Shark. So don't get tired of hearing that Baby Shark song because it is not going away. Yeah, Baby Shark's fantastic. And each episode has its own song in it. And these songs are like pop hits. So
who's writing them?
Pop music. Oh, it's a handful of people. So
okay.
We have the person in charge of all of our audio and music is a guy named Tommy Sika. And he works with a handful of collaborators. I think some of them are in New York, some of them are here in LA. Just really, really talented songwriters that have done things for shows like Sesame Street.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've taken up a bunch of your time. I'm so glad that you took the time to come and chat about Be Cool. And is there anywhere on social media you want people to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, which admittedly I don't update very much anymore, but you can find me there at CBJArt. If you want to see my portfolio online, which is a great spot to see my most recent work, you can check that out at cbjart.space, as in outer space. Actually, right. As in square space.
But outer space sounds better.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, and take care, and maybe we'll talk to you again sometime down the line.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. It was great chatting about Scooby, and thanks.
Well, that concludes my conversation with Be Cool Scooby-Doo background designer and art director, Cheryl Johnson. If you want to keep up with what Cheryl is doing, check out Baby Shark's Big Show on Nickelodeon, and be sure to follow her on Instagram at CBJArt and show her some love. I have to say, one of the fun things about doing these chats is that I sometimes figure out something new for myself in the course of the conversation, like the Scooby-Doo design thing that I talked about, where Iwao Takamoto designed Scooby to be the opposite of the perfect version of a Great Dane, and the overall irony of people's reaction to Scooby's design in Be Cool Scooby-Doo being unappealing or aesthetically unattractive when that's actually staying pretty on point as far as the original design brief that Takamoto was working under goes. And on just a little bit of a side note, at the risk of sounding somewhat self-aggrandizing, I also want to just throw in a small aside just to thank everyone for their support over on Twitter. Just prior to posting this episode, I managed to crest 1,000 followers on the old dumpster fire of a bird app, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that. I know that's small potatoes for a lot of people, but it's kind of a cool milestone for me, and I just wanted to acknowledge it on the show. I've genuinely enjoyed interacting with all of you there and look forward to keeping up the conversation moving forward. And speaking of social media, if you want to stay in the loop with all the latest Scooby and HB content on my feed, like exclusive interviews and audio commentaries featuring creatives from the shows, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the social media accounts for the show on Facebook, Twitter at Scooby-Doocast, Instagram at a podcast named Scooby-Doo, YouTube, and the show blog, where bonus content and reviews and whatnot are posted over at scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. If you have an option to rate or review the show, it does a lot to help with the algorithms and getting the show in front of the eyes and ears of people like you who may be interested in this material but maybe just aren't aware that the podcast exists. Lastly, if you're checking the show out on YouTube, click the bell to stay notified for whenever new content is being added to the channel. Be sure to come on back for my next episode where I will be revisiting the Scooby-Doo and Guess Who show and talking to one of the key players in executing that series and bringing it to air. Or stream. Or however you want to think about it or label it. I'm never really quite sure how to talk about Scooby-Doo Guess Who in terms of broadcast, since it kind of went straight to streaming, but not in all territories, because that was just Boomerang in the States, and everywhere else it was on their television networks. Hurts the brain to think about it. So watch the social media for announcements about that. And until then, again, I want to thank everyone for checking out this episode and just in general supporting the podcast. I hope everyone is staying safe, taking care, and I look forward to seeing you all next time for another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery.
So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.